everybody. I'm going to take just a quick second. I'm going to acknowledge that it's 10 o'clock, which was our announced start time, but we've also still got some people still coming in and arriving, and I can see some of you having a good time welcoming one another. So we're going to delay just a little bit our start time just so everybody can kind of get in and get settled. We'll start in just a few minutes. Thank you. morning, everyone. I'm going to ask if we can begin to settle into our seats and prepare to get started this morning. That would be wonderful. Good morning, friends. It is such an enormous joy for me to see all of you who are here, come from so many different areas, so many different meetings, all come together to join in a real celebration of Quakers across North Carolina. The North Carolina NCYM Inc. board had been having conversations about looking to find ways to promote this sort of fellowship between organizations beyond just the sort of financial management aspects that the board does. And this year in particular, being the 350 years of Quakers in North Carolina, seemed like an opportune time to try to sort of host an event that would invite together as many people as we could find and reach out to who are connected to Quakerism in North Carolina. Whether you're part of any particular yearly meeting or a fellowship or association, whatever it might be, we wanted just to really extend a broad invitation to get together as many people as possible to really celebrate the history of Friends in North Carolina, the fellowship that we have together, the ties that bind us, even if we may move in slightly different directions or slightly different circles, the opportunity to come together and celebrate one another and reconnect with everyone is just an enormous, enormous thing that we thought was important, and we're glad so many of you have responded. I think there are probably some more on their way even, so we'll keep putting up the tables if we need to, if we have more arrivals. But thank you for being here. Before we get started, I do want to extend a few thank yous for a lot of people who helped make this event possible, starting with the NCYM board and the board members. There's also, within that board, there's a committee who's been working on this with me to get this together. Kay Coltrane, Carolyn McPherson, and Kevin Smitherman have all been really, it's just been a great group to work with and prepare this event. Quaker Lake Camp, of course, we couldn't have done this without them. So Quaker Lake Camp, Heather Barner, Christian Allen, they did a lot of the prep work, getting the tables and all those kinds of things set up. We have Paul Ruth down here running sound and technology. You may have noticed that the sound and tech guy is sick and cannot talk. So if he doesn't have a lot to say to you, it's not because he's not friendly. He's just trying to preserve his voice the best that he can. I will note while I'm addressing this slide, you'll see the Wi-Fi and password up there. It might be a good idea to go ahead and prepare by connecting your phone to those, because we're going to do a trivia game in a little while that you'll answer questions on your phone. So having a good Wi-Fi connection might be beneficial for that, because you're going to want to get those answers in fast. Additional thank yous. Also want to recognize we've got Black Carter Smokehouse will be bringing in our meal later today. They gave us a discount on bringing the food in, so we want to extend thanks to them as well. It should be delicious. I will tell you in advance, we'll repeat this later. The sides should be, we've got meat entrees. It's a barbecue restaurant, but the sides should be meat free for anybody that needs that. So with those introductions or welcomes, I want to invite up Michael Fulp Jr. to extend an opening prayer.
Well, good morning. Good morning. It's good to see so many friends. Missed a lot of y'all. It's interesting, little quick story. My associate pastor the last couple of years has been going through the reporting process, and so it was fun. When he was going through that, he would come into my office every day and he would read something from George Fox's journal or John Woolman, and he would read about our own history in North Carolina. And he had no idea how intricate Quakers were in our state's history, and it gave him a new appreciation. And it's wonderful to see so many friends throughout North Carolina, and that we are the continuation of those friends that journeyed from a long ways to come together and worship and do work together. So it's good to see all of you friends here. I think our drives here were a lot easier than they were probably 300 plus years ago, which is great. But may we enjoy today and enjoy it together. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, we give you thanks that we can come together as friends, and that in this time we might have a spirit that embraces our past, to see how you have helped us and grown us to what we have become, so that we can go back to our own meetings and our own fellowships and be that continuation and going forward for another 350 years. And Lord, we ask that we would have this time to be able to recharge us and re-excite us so that we can take the manner of friends to others. And we ask these things in the name of the Lord Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Michael. So as we go through the morning, we're going to have a few different opportunities. We're going to have some opportunities to learn some things, a little bit of history. We're going to have some fun opportunities like the trivia game I mentioned earlier. And we're going to have plenty of opportunities for fellowship and just to get reacquainted with one another. So the first step along that reacquainted path is I'd like to take a moment and invite an opportunity for us to hear what meetings do we have represented here. Just what I'd like to do is maybe have one volunteer or one person who's here from each meeting that might be represented today to stand up, and we'll try to bring you a microphone, or you can come to a microphone and just tell us who you are, what meeting you're with, and maybe one either historical fact or interesting fact or something about the meeting that you're coming from. I'll give you the example. I'm Bill Davis. Good morning, everybody. I'm with First Friends meeting in Greensboro. And historical fact, First Friends began as Ashboro Street Friends meeting. And they changed their name later on when they were no longer located on Ashboro Street and became First Friends. So let's have some volunteers from other meetings. We'd like to have at least one person from each of the meetings who are represented here, so we hear a little bit of who all we have with us.
Good morning, friends. Good morning. I'm Kevin Smithman. I'm with Quaker Friends. Quaker was established in 1898. It was a proprietary meeting for 58 years. And I only found out this month because Yankton Valley Quarter is looking into the possibility of starting a preparatory meeting.
Welcome, thank you. All right, do we have any other meeting this year? Yeah, see you, friends. And there's one spot, yes.
I'm Ann Harris. I'm from Springfield meeting. With working on from Springfield meeting back in the 30s. I was a transplant to Arksdale. I started off at Springfield, which is 1770.
Welcome, thank you. There's close by here, other meetings that haven't yet introduced. Okay.
I'm Kay Coltrane from Center Friends meeting, and we're probably the closest meeting to where we are right now. We were established in 1757, and we have a pretty good delegation here today.
Wonderful, thank you, Center Friends.
I'm Catherine Griffith. I'm a pastor at Jamestown Friends. I've been a North Carolina resident since March. So I don't know very many people here. Jamestown was started in 1964, set off from Peace River.
Thank you. Welcome to Jamestown Friends.
I'm Carol McClure from Durham meeting. This is my husband Richard. I really don't remember when it was in the 40s, I believe, that we first began to meet in the basement of Duke Divinity School, but I wasn't here.
Welcome to Durham Friends. Thank you. Welcome over here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Teague from Winston-Salem meeting, which was set up in 1912, and we share one of our founders with Kernersville meeting, Myrtle Nelson.
Thank you. Welcome, Winston-Salem. Anybody else through here? Meetings, yes.
Good morning, I'm Glenn Jordan from Deep River Friends meeting. We were established in 1754 in High Point, and thinking back, we used to be, I guess, out of the country, and I was thinking about Deep River the other day. We had a cleanup day, and we are now pegged in by 3 4-lane roads and no longer in the country. We are right in the suburbs.
Welcome to Deep River
Goldsboro Friends meeting and Catania Porter. Catania Porter was made up of 10 monthly meetings at one time. Goldsboro meeting was established in 1906, and there are only 3 meetings left now in Catania Porter.
Yep.
I'm Don Barlow from Marlboro Friends Meeting. Marlboro was established in 1797 officially. They were actually approved in 1796, but the date we use is the date on our deed, and it acknowledges there was a meeting house already there when the property was deeded. So we don't really know for sure when friends first gathered there.
All right, welcome Marlboro Friends. Anybody else? Any other meetings? Yeah. I'll come there next.
Brenda McKinney, and this is my husband Brent from White Plains Friends meeting. Quakers moved into the White Plains area in 1850, became a comparative meeting under Deep Creek Friends, and their first monthly meeting was 1890.
Fantastic. Welcome, White Plains Friends. Yes.
My name is Penny Lee. I'm with Steinfeld Friends in Asheboro. And Steinfeld Friends started in 1894. And the building has now grown to include a separate fellowship hall and a joining education room.
Thank you. Welcome, Science Hub Friends. Any other meetings, congregations, churches, anybody we haven't gotten yet? All right. Well, that's a wonderful opportunity to hear from
all the various different meetings that are here, and we welcome each and every one of you, and we're grateful that you were able to join us today. Our next item, I had mentioned we're going to have some education, some history shared with us, and we have the number one. If you say, who can I talk to about some Quaker history? I think the very first answer you'll get is this person, and I think everybody knows who that might be. A finalist for Beard of the Year every single year for as long as I can remember. Max Carter, come on up and share some with us.
The back of my head got jealous of the front of my head, trying to keep up with Bill Eagles and Paul Ruth. And, I've got a long way to go in many ways. Thank you very much. And in terms of applause, I don't deserve any. Most of what I say I make up anyway. I told my students they just had to figure out which half of what I told them in class was true or not. But again, the way Quakers applaud is this very silent. You'll see if it deserves any of that. Some of you probably remember when we celebrated 300 years of North Carolina Yearly Meeting back in 1998, I think, at Dana Auditorium. I shared a talk about what would be missing in North Carolina if Quakers had never come. And I'm going to do kind of a rendition of that today, kind of It's a Wonderful Life, sort of what would be missing if we weren't around. And I want to focus on kind of the fruits of our presence in Southern Virginia, North Carolina, and given that we have Eno River folk here, even Wrightsboro, Georgia, where those folk from Eno River headed out during the War of Regulation to settle there in Georgia. And I'll literally get to fruit after a while. But celebrating 350 years of Quakerism here in North Carolina, we recall that this was essentially a Quaker colony in the beginning. So what would be missing in the late 1600s when William Edmondson, George Fox, and other friends gathered out at the Clemens and Pastor Tank would be a whole government of the colony. We had a Quaker governor, John Archdale, after whom Archdale is named, after it was Bush Hill for many of its years. And we had a Quaker assembly, the first organized Christian religion in North Carolina was the North Carolina Yearly Meeting, established in 1698. The first public school established by Friends in 1703, 1704 at Simon's Creek. So a lot would be missing from our history if Quakers had gathered here. It would have been a very unruly sort of a place without a governor, without an assembly, but that was pretty typical of the Carolina backcountry back then, and that may have been part of what attracted Friends to this unruly, nonconformist group of Quakers. It was such a Quaker colony, in fact, that another thing that would be missing from the world would be two of the Church of England's missionary societies. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel and the Society for the Preservation of Christian Knowledge, which were formed in part to send missionaries from England to win back those heretics who had joined the Society of Friends to the true church. The first missionaries reported back that the colony was under a dark cloud of Quakerism. And it was almost impossible to rein them back in. So, of course, how do you get rid of Quakers from government? Require them to swear an oath of allegiance to Queen Anne when she ascended the throne. Quakers wouldn't swear an oath, so we were out of government, but I swear we stuck around as a Society of Friends. Now, into the 1700s, that center of Quakerism shifted in the mid-1700s to the Piedmont area. It would be difficult for folk to come down the Shenandoah Valley had it not been for those first Quakers who wandered down the Philadelphia Wagon Road in the 1740s, establishing that route through the Shenandoah Valley. The Bryant Party, a group of Quakers from southeastern Pennsylvania, settled along the Yadkin River. And how would we find our way through the Shenandoah Valley today if it hadn't been for those Quakers? They were followed very quickly, as you've heard from the establishment dates of Deep River, New Garden, and some of the other meetings here. In the 1740s and 50s, Cane Creek, 1749, New Garden, the first gathering of Friends, 1751, Deep River, about 1754, and established quite a presence here. And what would be missing if those folk hadn't gathered here? Well, for one thing, during the battles of the Revolutionary War, who would have taken care of all those dead and wounded people on the battlefields when both Cornwallis and Greene just left their soldiers on the battlefield, assuming the Quakers would take care of it? Who would have fed those armies had it not been for all the Quaker farmers whose fields and larders and barns were raided by the soldiers from the British and the Americans to feed their armies? There wasn't a Harris Teeter distribution center nearby. The distribution center was all those Quaker farms. And it brings to mind one of the great stories of Judith Gardner Mendenhall. Some of you know this story. The Mendenhalls had a mill, some of you know, there on Penny Road, near the Piedmont Environmental Center, right on the Deep River. And the headquarters of the British Army were up at Deep River Meeting House. About 2,500 soldiers encamped there. And they raided all the farms around to feed those soldiers, including taking all the grain, flour, produce from the Mendenhall mill there on the Deep River. And one day they finally hauled off the last milk cow from their herd. Judith Gardner Mendenhall was one of those Nantucket women. You don't mess with Nantucket Quaker women, because the men were always out to sea. My wife always tells me men are always out to sea, chasing whales. And so the women ran that place and developed really strong character, like Lucretia Kaufman Mott, Judith Gardner Mendenhall. And Judith Gardner Mendenhall was not amused by this fact. She marched up to the headquarters of the British Army, demanded her cow back, and walked back to the mill leading her cow. Don't mess with Nantucket Quaker women, or I've learned any Quaker women. There was, again, quite a contribution of Friends in the late 1700s not only to aiding those soldiers who fell in those battles, but also in the beginnings of the anti-slavery movement here in North Carolina. By 1778, Quakers were free of involvement with slavery, supposedly. There are a few who wiggled around that, but for the most part, Quakers then turned their efforts to establishing the first manumission societies, recolonization societies, and eventually, of course, the Underground Railroad. One of the other things that might be missing, had it not been for Quakers in this area, is the portrait of George Washington in the White House. Dolly Madison, born Dolly Payne in the New Garden community, I think it's 1768, I think it was. She spent at least 6 months here, so we claim her. Eventually, as you know, Mary James Madison became the great hostess of the White House. As the British invaded Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, and were burning down the city, and were about to burn down the White House, she saved that portrait, that Stuart portrait of George Washington. So we can credit her with that. If you've ever been to the Greensboro Historical Museum and seen the dress of Dolly Madison, you'll recognize that she wasn't overly Quaker by the time that she married James Madison. That was quite a dress. Anyway, I'll leave it to your imagination. Into the 1800s, again, what would be missing in this area were it not for Quakers? Well, for one thing, it's a long, long way to Indiana if you don't have Quaker accompaniment on the Underground Railroad. 1819, Quakers became very involved here in assisting fugitives from slavery in walking the 450 miles to the nearest free state. It would have been very difficult for those who had been kept legally illiterate and denied opting to read directions, maps, other orientation towards getting to freedom, were it not for the assistance, not only of Quakers, but others opposed to slavery here. A massive interracial civil disobedience movement began here that Quakers were involved with in getting thousands of people out of the slave South to Indiana and Ohio. Absolutely unreal when you think about how difficult that would have been. If you've read some of the books, Sumach Kid's Invention of Wings, a fictionalized version of this, but other histories of the Underground Railroad, you know you can't get out of the Deep South. There are vigilante groups, headhunters, bounty hunters. You've been kept illiterate. There aren't roads. You don't have GPS on your walking stick. Getting folk out of here, this deep in the South, could only happen with that cooperative effort, with many Quakers involved. Without New Garden Boarding School, established in 1837, because so many Quakers had left for the North and they needed at least one place where boys and girls could be deprived of any sort of fun. Developing that boarding school 7 miles away from the nearest known sin in Greensboro, out in the country. There wouldn't have been a base for one of the great stories of that Underground Railroad saga. Vina Curry was a free black woman who lived among the Quaker community along Horsepin Creek in what's now Greensboro. Her husband died in the early 1830s. She inherited his free papers, and when the boarding school was established in 1837, she was hired as a domestic, as a washerwoman, because she had a 12-acre hardscrabble farm and several children to provide for. And while she was washing away those students' clothing in the old boarding school, she interviewed young black men who were desperate to get out of the slave South to see if they matched the description of her husband, and were trustworthy enough to take these free papers to get to Indiana or Ohio and give them back to a Quaker like Levi Cotton, who would bring them back. She got 15 people out of the South washing away on her scrub board with the assistance of the widow of Vestal Coffin, who had been the first conductor on the Underground Railroad here in Guilford County in 1819. when he died, and she went to Indiana with some of the migrations, couldn't stand it because they hadn't developed basketball or sugar cream pie up there yet. She came back to the New Garden community, became matron of the women's side of the boarding school, and committed to her husband's work and her work in the Underground Railroad. I'm sure that she and Vina were this dynamic duo in the boarding school, getting those folk out. How many hundreds or thousands would not have gone to freedom without that presence? Without DeWitt Binbo, how many know DeWitt Binbo? Without DeWitt Binbo, we would be without all of the colleges and universities in Greensboro. If you know the surnames around here in Quaker country, the Binbos come from the Oak Ridge area. DeWitt Binbo was a dentist who went down to Fayetteville during the Civil War to practice his craft. But as a conscious objector during the Civil War, Fayetteville is probably not the place you want to be. And he came back to Greensboro, where he opened the first luxury hotel in Greensboro's history. Now, I don't know what a Quaker luxury hotel looks like. Jane and I were in one last week in Palestine. It's not 5-star, let me tell you. But it was the Binbo Hotel, which was where the Walrus is now. It's an interesting historical site. DeWitt Binbo, becoming fairly wealthy as a philanthropist, got North Carolina A&M University to move to Greensboro, now North Carolina A&T. He became aware of a struggling little black Methodist school getting its start in the basement of a Methodist church in Warnersville, a community started by Philadelphia Quaker Yardley Warner, who is Cape Hood Seal's ancestor. And he used his own funds to get it up and running, now Bennett College. He became aware that a Methodist women's college had recently burned down, and they didn't have the funds to build it back. So, with his own money, paying the expenses, and using his own staff to do the reconstruction, he got Greensboro College back up and running. On the board of New Garden Boarding School, he helped transition that school into Guilford College in 1888. And then working with Mary Chawner Woody, Mary Mendenhall Hobbs, Charles McIver, and others, established the state's first public college for women, now UNCG. DeWitt Binbo. Without Quaker tolerance, none of you wearing denim might be able to, or might be appearing in rather unquakerly appearance right now. Quakers, with their reputation for tolerance, helped attract the Cone family, who established their textile mills in Greensboro, attracting a large Jewish community, the Benjamins, the Sternbergers, the Tannenbaums, and others. Why would textile owners choose to build their mills in a place where there wasn't a river for a source of power? It was because of the Quaker community. We'd be devoid of that whole community and industry were it not for that Quaker reputation and the presence of those Quakers in Greensboro. We might be devoid of baseball south of the Mason-Dixon had it not been for Quakers. Lewis Lyndon Hobbs, the first president of Guilford College, after he graduated from New Garden Boarding School, went off to Haverford, that Orthodox Burneyite school. He would never step foot on the campus of Swarthmore, that Hicksite institution. And Haverford, as they still do today, plays cricket. Baseball is a derivative of cricket, and some historians believe Lewis Lyndon Hobbs was the first person to bring baseball south of the Mason-Dixon, where the Hobbs Hollow Boys became famous for their prowess in baseball. And needing somebody to play, they recruited other teams, and baseball became a fixture and our culture here. We'll come back to that in a moment. If it had not been for the Baltimore Association to advise and assist friends in the southern states during and after the Civil War, we might not need an NC State Cooperative Extension Agriculture Program. Long before there was that agriculture program in NC State, Baltimore friends came to rebuild the southern agricultural economy after the Civil War. They bought Nathan Hunt's old property in High Point and established the model farm, teaching modern scientific attitudes about agriculture, new hybrids, the manuring of crops, rotation of crops, planting clover, thousands of pounds of clover imported to fix nitrogen in the soil. And there were any number of associations and newsletters helping friends and others in the southern states develop modern scientific agriculture and rebuild the devastated economy. And without that preceding North Carolina State's program, Archdale and High Point would also be missing 3 road names: Nathan Hunt Road, Model Farm Road off of 311, and Swarthmore Road. Because the original name for the model farm was Swarthmore Farm, after George Fox and Margaret Fell's capital of Quakerism in England, pronounced by those northerners Swarthmore. So if you're familiar with Swarthmore Road, that's why it's named that. Now, there's one other thing I want to highlight from that period of our history that might be missing. How many of you like condensed milk? Carnation condensed milk. If it hadn't been for Amos Stewart or Elbridge Amos Stewart, we'd be missing that. Elbridge Amos Stewart took his father, Amos Stewart's, understanding of how you build a quality dairy herd. They had a dairy farm there on Willard Dairy Road. With him in his migration first to Indiana, Chicago, and eventually out to Pacific Northwest, where he developed condensed milk and the Carnation Dairy Corporation. And there's a wonderful story of when Alan Jay, who had come down to supervise that Baltimore work of rebuilding the Southern Quaker community, was out trying to raise funds for a struggling little college out there, Pacific Academy, Pacific College, now George Fox University. He learned that there was a group of Quakers on a hillside outside of Seattle, worshiping in an excess or redundant Navy tent. And he said, that's not right. Quakers shouldn't be worshiping in a tent, for one thing, or a Navy tent especially. They need a proper meeting house. Well, Alan Jay goes into the office of Elbridge Amos Stewart and starts talking about all their mutual acquaintances from back in Guilford County. You remember this person, that person? And Elbridge finally looked at it and said, how much is this visit going to cost me? and Alan Jay said, well, you know, there's this group of Quakers worshiping on a hillside outside of Seattle in a tent. They need a meeting house. Stewart whips out his checkbook, writes out a check for $5,000 for the meeting house. And then writes out another check for $1,000 saying, you know, they'll need furniture. Alan Jay. Now, one of the other things, I told you we're going to talk about the fruits of our labors here. We're finally going to get to fruit here. Back Creek. Who's from Back Creek here, or those whose meeting descends from Back Creek? Is it Asheboro, I think it is? Well, you may know of Henderson and Seth Llewellyn, who left from Back Creek in the early 1800s to Iowa, where their home became a major station on the Underground Railroad. They developed quite a nursery. Well, they packed up with the usual Quaker frontier fever and so for following the Oregon Trail and packed up 700 fruit trees in a specially built wagon pulled by 6 oxen and went out to the Willamette Valley outside of Milwaukee, spelled differently than the brewers spell it, in Oregon, and established a nursery there where their orchard supervisor was a Chinese immigrant named Ah Bing. One day they found an interesting cultivar in one of the rows of their nursery, an amazing cherry that they named after Ah Bing, the Bing cherry. I will not go into what Henderson Llewellyn went on to establish. Look it up. Has to do with a free-love community in Honduras, but we do owe the Bing cherry to Seth Henderson. And of course, we know that later on, the Levering orchard became one of the largest cherry orchards in the South. Starting in 1908 as an apple orchard. And then when Sam Levering went off to Cornell, a college founded by a Quaker, Ezra Cornell, he came back saying, we need to develop stone fruits. And if you know this story, Sam planted all these cherry trees and found out that not only did the customers like cherries, so did the birds. And so he started setting off shotguns and rifles to scare the birds away, and said, that just frightened the neighbors. So he then shot a bunch of birds and hung their carcasses in the limbs to scare away the birds. That just scared away the customers. So we just started planting more and more trees. The birds got their half, the Leverings got their half, and became the largest cherry orchard in the South. And without that orchard, without Sam and Miriam Levering's commitment to peace and justice, we wouldn't have the Law of the Seas Treaty. They hosted gatherings for some 10 years there at the orchard, including Elliot Richardson and diplomats from all over the world, to hammer out how are we going to use mutually the resources of the sea. Well, back to the 1900s now. Without the heresy trials in Indiana yearly meeting, which stripped Earlham College of its entire Bible department, we probably wouldn't have the Durham Friends meeting. Albert Russell was one of those professors who was essentially ridden out of town on a rail for his more progressive understanding of the modern scholarship, the German scholarship of the Bible, and modern theology. Ruined his career, became dean of the Duke Divinity School, and helped establish Durham Friends meeting. And had it not been for Quakers in the previous century, would we even have a Duke in Durham? Those Quakers and Methodists there in Trinity had this little Union Academy that eventually became Duke University. And when Trinity moved to Durham in, 1892, became Duke University in 1924. The Quakers had hung on. Would we even have a Gothic chapel in Durham? We'd have a simple little meeting house there at Duke. Well, again, in the early 1900s, we have Quaker involvement in baseball. And this is important for a kid who grew up in Indiana, playing baseball every Sunday afternoon with Rusty Parsons and his family. If you are a Quaker on a farm in that old culture where you couldn't dance, you couldn't go to the theater, you couldn't play cards, you couldn't do anything that was fun on a Sunday afternoon, between the big meal on first day and milking the cows in the evening, what would you do? You played baseball. And the Parsons family and the Carter family, on I don't know how many Sundays, would gather on our own farms in eastern Howard County, the poor end of Howard County, and western Howard County. Western high school Panthers beat the Comets very seldom. And we would play baseball. Well, that kind of culture developed along with Losman and Hobbs introducing baseball to the South, quite a machine of Quakers into the professional sport of baseball. And now we're in the middle of the World Series, where the Philadelphia Phillies, formerly known as the Philadelphia Quakers, as they became a professional baseball team, or playing. In the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, Guilford College especially was just a minor league producing professional baseball players, and several teams would be devoid of their star players had it not been for that Quaker presence. The first I want to mention is Ernie Shore. Now, many of you know this story. Ernie Shore later on became the sheriff of Forsyth County, and Ernie Shore Field was where the Warthogs played for many, many years. Graduated from Guilford in 1913, went on to play for the Boston Red Sox as one of their star pitchers. On the same pitching staff with whom? Babe Ruth, who was a great pitcher before he was sent off to the Yankees. Well, in the June game in 1917, Babe Ruth starts the game, walks the first batter, argues ball 4 so vociferously, he slugs the umpire and is tossed out of the game. No outs, top of the first, runner on first base. The manager sends Ernie Shore in to just tamp things down until they get a proper pitcher warmed up. And they pick off the runner trying to steal second base to record the first out of the game. And Ernie Shore moves the next 26 down in succession for a perfect game pitched in relief. And that was an asterisk for a long time. Now it's called a combined no-hitter, kind of like what the Astros did to the Philadelphia Quakers a couple of days ago, when 4 relief pitchers pitched a no-hitter. Well, Ernie Shore was not only that relief pitcher, but he also was Babe Ruth's road roommate. And his daughter-in-law still lives at Friends Homes West and says, there are stories. There are stories. I won't go into them. But that was just one of many. The next year, Tom Zachary graduates from Guilford College and goes up to Philadelphia to train with the American Fringe Service Corps to do relief work as a conscious objector during World War II in France. While he's up there, under an assumed name, he plays for Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics, and then goes off to France, comes back, and signs with the Washington Senators. And in 1924, Tom Zachary won 2 of the 4 games that the Senators won to win the World Championship. Without Tom Zachary, the Senators would have really lived up to the old slogan, if any of you remember, the old Washington Senators. Washington, first in war, first in peace, last in the American League. Now, most of you know Tom Zachary for one thing. 1927, Tom Zachary served up Babe Ruth's 60th home run. But he also won 2 games in the World Series, 1924. When I first came down here in 1990, I went off to speak at spring meeting where Tom Zachary was from. And I mentioned that connection. And after meeting, an elderly man came up and said, I understand you kind of like baseball. I said, yeah. I said, well, I want to show you something. Takes me to his farmhouse near the spring meeting and pulls a cardboard box out from under the daybed and shows me all these artifacts that he, a cousin of Tom Zachary, had inherited from Tom Zachary, including a baseball signed by the 1927 Yankees. That could fund everything that Quakers are doing today. And knew where that baseball was. Several basketball teams would be devoid of their star players were it not for Quakers playing for Guilford College. 1973 NAIA National Championship team at Guilford featured 4 future NBA players. The 2 most outstanding ones were World B. Free of the Philadelphia 76ers and M.L. Carr of the Boston Celtics. Later on, we still have that contribution to baseball with Floyd Wicker. Any of you from Cane Creek? I think Floyd Wicker's still around. Major league player who told me that when he played for the Giants, he played for the San Francisco Giants in 1971 for 9 games. with a grand total of batting average of 103, I think it was. But first day he's playing with the Giants, he's in the same outfield with Willie Mays. And as Floyd tells the story, he goes after the outfield, Willie Mays is playing center field, batter comes up, and Willie yells out, "Wicker, move in!" And Wicker moves in. "Not far enough, Wicker! Move in farther!" Moves in farther, and the batter hits a line drive right into Floyd Wicker's neck. That's how well Willie Mays knew the players in the National League. Well, we're running out of time here, so we want to move quickly to today. So are Quakers still contributing in such a way that without our presence, would something be missing? Well, indeed, we are. And I'm going to highlight one of those institutions that, since 1837, has had a continuous history in North Carolina, while other institutions have changed, disappeared, taken on different forms. And that would be New Garden Boarding School, now Guilford College. One thing would be the Arizona Diamondbacks might not have a world championship in 2001. Do any of you remember that World Series game with the Yankees? In the 7th game, deciding game, in the 9th inning, it didn't look good for the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Yankees had their premier relief pitcher, Mariano Rivera, on the mound to wrap up this win. And Tony Womack, little Guilford College graduate, comes up to bat and knocks in the tying run. Next batter knocked in the winning run. Now, when Tony was a senior at Guilford, I was teaching American religious history, and I knew that Tony had already played in the minor leagues for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he came knocking on my office door one day saying, "I've got to have your class to graduate in December." And I said, "Tony, I filled the class up. There's no space, no physical space even in my classrooms. I've got to do it. I've got to have this class, or else I don't graduate." So, okay, I'll tell you what, Tony, if you ever make it to the show, you make it to the majors, and I get a ticket, you can have my class. He takes my class, better baseball player than student, graduates. I've never seen that ticket. But anyway, two other things that would be missing. Charlotte Friends Meeting produced a wonderful young woman, Christina Repoli, who graduated from our Quaker Leadership Scholars Program a few years ago and went on to establish the Quaker Voluntary Service Program, a national program giving young college graduates an opportunity to do something else than say, "Would you like fries with that?" after they graduate from college. It's had a profound impact on the Society of Friends in providing young people with that opportunity for a year of service, many of whom then go on to leadership positions in the Society of Friends and elsewhere. Without that program at Guilford, we wouldn't have John Watts, who came from Baltimore Yearly, which used to have that close relationship with us through the Baltimore Association. He founded Quaker Speak, the YouTube channel that produced weekly programs about Quaker history, theology, spirituality. Without that video channel, we'd all be watching cat videos now. And finally, I just want to say that without that little institution, a lot of our meetings and programs in North Carolina would be devoid of leadership. Cedar Square might not have a pastor. Rocky River might not have a pastor. Winston-Salem might not have a speaker. The yearly meeting, the Friends Church of North Carolina's youth program and campus ministry program would be without leadership. A graduate this year of Guilford College and the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program, Beulah Williams. So without us, there'd be a lot missing. And I hope that our next 350 years continues to produce that same quality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. Appreciate you sharing all of that with us, both informative as well as entertaining and fun. So thank you for that. We're going to take a short little morning break. It'll give you an opportunity, anyone that needs to visit the restroom, get yourself another donut, freshen your coffee, or just visit with one another. We're going to pick back up at 11:15. So it's about 15 minutes from now. We'll pick back up with the trivia game. I'm going to ask Paul to go ahead and put up the trivia game on the wall here, because what will happen is, the way you get to it is you go to the website. It's kahoot.it, which will come up here in a minute. There'll be a game code that you put in. It prompts you to put that in, and then you put in your name so that when as you answer questions and score points, it will come up on the board. So make sure you do that, take this opportunity, and that way when we come back in just a little bit, I can walk you through how the game is going to work, and we'll get started with our game. 11:15. Thank you.